Hello to each and every one of you, Bawler, and this is important news for you. Subscribe and write in the comments what you think about it. The ongoing war in Iran has the potential to utterly destabilize Russia on multiple fronts: economically, geopolitically, militarily, and even demographically. And with US President Donald Trump ramping up American involvement, practically declaring war on Iran, Moscow finds itself in one of the most vulnerable positions in modern history. Let's break down what Russia stands to lose as Iran continues to face relentless bombing. First and most obvious is the collapse of its drone supply chain. Since the early days of the war in Ukraine, once Kiev pushed back the initial Russian assault, the conflict shifted into a grinding war of attrition. Russia, short on advanced weaponry, leaned heavily on manpower and aging military stockpiles. But what truly changed the battlefield dynamic was drones. Ukraine rapidly scaled up its drone program, while Russia floundered. Its precision-guided munitions were dwindling fast, and drone strikes emerged as the most cost-effective way to keep pressure on Ukrainian forces. This is where Iran entered the picture. From September 2022 to September 2024, Russia launched over 8,000 Iranian-made Shahed drones at Ukrainian targets. Known in Ukraine as flying mopeds due to their noisy engines, these drones formed the backbone of Russia's terror campaign against Ukrainian cities and infrastructure. Initially, Iran sent around 3,000 Shahed 136 units, each costing $20,000 to $50,000, a fraction of the cost of NATO interceptor missiles Ukraine used to shoot them down. Made of low-cost materials like foam, plywood, and plastic, each Shahed carried a 110-pound warhead and was guided by a cheap but effective sensor and GPS setup. The genius of the Shahed wasn't in its precision, it was in its affordability. It overwhelmed expensive defense systems with waves of cheap drones, forcing Ukraine to burn through its missile stockpile. Realizing the value, Russia began domestic production. By mid-2023, a drone factory was up and running in Yelabuga, Tatarstan. With help from Iranian engineers, Russia rebranded the Shahed 136 as the Garan 2 and pushed it into mass production. Some estimates claim Russia produced over 10,000 drones by late 2024, more than triple Iran's direct exports. Please support my channel with a small donation. It's not much for you, but for me it's an incentive to keep going and bring you important news. I've included a PayPal link to support my channel in the description for this video. Thank you. But there are problems. Russian production still depends on Iranian know-how. Navigation, warhead assembly, and quality control still require Iranian technicians. Russia's attempts to reverse engineer the drone tech independently have failed, especially in acquiring flight control software and electronic components. As a result, Garan drones have high failure rates. In some strikes, up to 82% of Russian drones and missiles are being neutralized, many diverted into empty fields due to poor guidance systems. Labor shortages also plague the Yelabuga plant, forcing the Kremlin to use students and untrained foreign workers. Meanwhile, Ukraine's drone capabilities are surging. In June, during Operation Spiderweb, Ukrainian forces reportedly smuggled drones 2,200 miles into Russia to strike bombers. This proves that any Russian drone facility is within reach. In contrast, Ukraine cannot hit Iranian factories with the same ease. That makes Iranian exports vital to Russia, but now Tehran is under siege. With Israeli F-35s and US stealth bombers targeting drone plants in Iran, Tehran can no longer afford to supply drones to Moscow. It needs every drone for its own defense. This also hits Iran financially. Domestically, a Shahed costs $10,000, $50,000, but exports to Russia were sold in bulk for as much as $104 million. Funds Iran used to sustain its weapons programs. Supplying Russia not only strengthened Iran's military, but made Moscow a key investor in its defense sector. Now, with war erupting against Israel, Iran's production must serve its own needs. Both nations lose. Russia is stuck relying on less capable domestic drones, and Iran loses a vital revenue stream. But drones aren't the only concern. Putin's strategy of using the Middle East to distract the West from Ukraine is collapsing. His alliances in Syria, Libya, and with Iran were meant to stretch NATO thin. But instead of dividing attention, the Iran-Israel conflict is uniting the West. When Iran retaliated against Israeli strikes with hundreds of drones and missiles, Europe recognized the authoritarian threat it's been confronting in Ukraine. This triggered a change in tone, less appeasement, more readiness for direct action. Already, France and the UK, nuclear powers in their own right, are calling for stronger displays of force. This breaks the prior pattern of careful aid balancing, enough for Ukraine to survive, but not enough to provoke Russia. As a new war erupts on Europe's doorstep, fear of new refugee waves is also galvanizing more hawkish policies. Right-wing governments rising across Europe may support fast military interventions rather than prolonged humanitarian responses. Economically, the pressure on Russia is tightening. In May, the EU enacted its 17th sanctions package, choking off Russia's access to vital military supplies and tech. As the war drags on, Europe gains leverage. slowly strangling Moscow's economy. Putin's gambit, using the chaos of Middle East wars to overwhelm Europe, may backfire entirely. The shift in European politics and policy could produce an even more aggressive stance. Moreover, Putin's position in BRICS is weakening. BRICS, originally driven by Russia, is now shifting toward Chinese leadership. China's response to the Iran crisis has been one of calculated neutrality, positioning itself as a peacemaker. Meanwhile, Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its inability to force a ceasefire undermines its credibility. China has been quietly taking control. It now buys vast amounts of Russian fossil fuels, $82 billion in 2024 alone, and dictates trade terms. China demands steep discounts, exerts dominance over semiconductor and machinery exports, and delays energy contracts like the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline. Beijing is clearly signaling that it, not Moscow, sets BRICS policy now. The humiliation runs deep. Russia, once proud of its military strength, is now economically colonized by China. Forced to choose between supporting Iran and pleasing Beijing, Putin finds himself boxed in. Worse still, the global oil trade is slipping away. Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point for 20% of the world's oil. If the strait closes due to conflict, oil prices could spike, but that doesn't mean windfall profits for Moscow. China, India, and even US allies like Japan and South Korea all rely on Middle Eastern oil shipped through the strait. Russia cannot fill the gap. Buyers may instead turn to stable suppliers like Canada, Brazil, and Norway, countries free from war and sanctions. Russia, burdened by international isolation and using a decaying fleet of shadow tankers to smuggle oil, becomes less competitive every day. These tankers, numbering between 350 and 600, are aging, underinsured, and operated by crews working illegally. As tensions rise, NATO and US navies are increasing patrols in these waters, using the Iran crisis as a reason to target suspicious vessels. That puts Russia's entire shadow fleet at risk. These ships can't dock, can't get repairs, and can't ask for help. If just a fraction are seized or sunk, Russia's war economy could implode. Already, the Kremlin spends 6.3% of GDP on defense, more than at any time since the Cold War. This is unsustainable. Two assumptions kept Putin's war effort alive: that Europe would remain reliant on Russian energy, and that nuclear threats would keep NATO cautious. Both have collapsed. Russian gas imports to Europe plummeted from 40% in 2021 to just 11% in 2024. The EU plans to cut that to zero by 2027. And Europe has proven it can handle energy crises, now investing in renewables and reconsidering nuclear power. Germany is even debating reactivating old reactors. But the most dangerous blow to Russia isn't logistical, it's psychological. Europe is abandoning the notion that diplomacy alone can stop Putin. NATO aid has prevented defeat but not delivered victory. Now, with the US taking direct action in Iran, Europe may follow. If not through military force, then through bold strategic steps. This is Putin's worst-case scenario: a Europe no longer afraid, no longer dependent, and fully prepared to confront Russian aggression. The war in Iran might not just damage Russia, it could end Putin's ability to sustain his war in Ukraine altogether. If that happens, the man who once controlled one of the world's largest energy empires will be left presiding over a crippled, isolated nation with no means to project power beyond its borders.